Whenever I tell people I'm a software engineer, if they don't work in tech or if they don't work with software engineers, I usually get one of two reactions. Either they act as if I've spoken a completely different language, or they say something like, "Oh, cool, so what does that mean?" Software engineering is such a broad title, and I guess it's one of those careers that's quite mysterious from the outside. What do we actually do day to day, and what does it actually mean? And I get it, because the title software engineer doesn't really explain what we do day to day, and it's really unclear from the outside. So in this video, I thought I'd just kind of break it down, tell you about the different roles within software engineering and the different paths that you can go down. Whether you're coming from a non-technical background and you're just curious, or whether you're thinking about transitioning into software engineering, hopefully this video can give you a bit more clarity and a bit more of an idea about what it actually involves and kind of help you with that decision or just feed that curiosity. Hey, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Becca. I'm a full-time software engineer, part-time Pilates instructor, and someone with multiple interests and multiple different passions. I love sharing bits of my life, insights into my career, tips on productivity, and everything in between. If you enjoy this content, please don't forget to like and subscribe. But for now, let's just get straight into the video. Software engineering isn't just one job. It's a whole kind of world of different roles, each with their own focus, their own tools, and their own ways of working. Some are more creative, focusing on beautiful interfaces and the way things look. Others are more thinking behind the scenes, solving complex problems, thinking about how things work internally, and some are more data-driven. You've got options that lead more towards infrastructure and hardware, and then others that lead more towards experimentation and research side of things and figuring things out. You have ones that are focused on innovation and experimentation, like game development or maybe AI-related things. So it really depends on your skill set and what you enjoy doing, and ultimately that's gonna kind of influence the path that you go down. It all depends on what kind of problems you like solving, what kind of teams you like to work in, and what kind of, what kind of subject you want to work with as well. So this is why I want to make this video, just to break down the different areas and you can kind of figure out what suits you best. So let's start with the core software engineering roles. These are your more typical classic coding focused roles, and if you're learning to program right now and you're aiming to be a software engineer, this is typically what you're probably imagining in your head. Your classic roles like your front-end developer, backend, full stack, or your mobile app developer. Now, all of these roles are similar in the sense that they all work on building new applications, new websites, or new features, and coding is a big focus of them. It's not the main focus because there are so many aspects involved in software engineering, but that is a big focus. Some people really enjoy building beautiful, interactive user interfaces, and they really enjoy that creative side of things. These people tend to gravitate more towards front-end development. So front-end engineering is all about working on the bits that users can actually see and users actually interact with. So thinking about the buttons, the forms, how users interact with the page, thinking about the design and the layout and how things look visually. But as well as that visual aspect, you also think about how accessible are things, how responsive is the design across different devices, and how easy is it to use? How intuitive is it for users? Front-end engineers also work with APIs and pulling in data from the backend. So thinking about maybe you want to display some products that you need to fetch from the backend, how you're going to display those on the page, or also thinking about how users interact with that data. So maybe there's a part for some input if users need to fill in some text or they need to select some items. You're thinking of all of that data flow to and from the backend as well. And because the results are very visual in front end, you get that kind of immediate response. You can see what you're working on pretty much straight away. And this is quite satisfying for some people, especially if you feel like you're a visual learner or you just love the visual side of things. So that's something also to bear in mind that differs between front end and back end in different types of software engineering roles. In terms of languages, you'll often work with things like HTML, CSS, TypeScript or JavaScript, and you might use a framework such as React. So if you really like to combine that creativity and that design kind of thinking with that problem-solving aspect, then front-end engineering might be for you. Now, the other side of front-end is back-end. So back-end engineering is a little bit trickier to understand. And I think that's partly because you can't see it visually in the same way as you can with front-end. And I'm mainly a back-end engineer, but even I understand that sometimes it's a little confusing to explain to others. Even sometimes I struggle to explain to non-technical friends or family members what exactly I do. And that's because all of the back-end work is basically working on all of the stuff behind the scenes. You're implementing the logic for the applications to run and things to run smoothly behind the scenes. As a back-end engineer, you're kind of building the foundations of the app. You're telling things how to send the data to the front end, and when you receive that data from the front end, say a user puts in some information in a form, or they say, I want to order this product, the back end will then take that information and write the logic to actually make it happen. You're working with databases, you're handling the data flow, you're setting up those APIs for the front end to call, and you're sending data to and from the front end. You're maybe interacting with third-party APIs. Maybe you're interacting with different microservices across the company. And you could just be working on a small section. So let's say a user wants to order a product. That information travels in from the front end to the back end, and you're basically setting up all of that logic to make that happen, to make it possible for the user. You're thinking about maybe the checkout process. You're thinking about what happens to that payment. You're thinking about what happens in terms of legal things, what happens in terms of different scenarios if the payment fails, if you want to check this part of the process, if you want to take these particular details. And again, you could just be working on a tiny section of that, but essentially you're working on the things that actually get the logic to work for the user's end goal, all the stuff behind the scenes. A big part of the back end is also thinking about architecture and how you want the system to be designed and the most logical way for things to happen. And not just the most logical, but also the most optimal in so many different senses. And there could be a whole video on just that because there's so much to explore within that. But essentially, it's all of the stuff behind the scenes to make the programs, the apps, actually run and actually function. In terms of languages, common languages for the back end include Java, Python, C#, and many other languages. And in terms of databases, you could be working with Postgres, CockroachDB, MySQL. You could be working with databases that are more cloud-based, like AWS services, maybe DynamoDB. There's a whole range of different databases and different languages, but they differ a lot from the front end. So if you like solving logical problems and thinking about how different systems fit together, thinking about maybe scalability and performance, then backend is probably suited to you. And then there are people who enjoy both front end and back end, and that's the full stack route. Full stack engineers like working on the user interface and the design of things, but also the problem solving in the background as well. It's a great role if you enjoy the variety and if you enjoy working on things end to end, all the way from the user inputs and the user interface taking that data all the way to the back end, connecting to those APIs, following the data flow through, linking things up to the database and other external services, and then all the way back up towards the front end again, having that whole journey end to end. And like I said, it's very varied. One day you might be working on styling of components, and the next you might be working with APIs or databases. So it's great if you love both ends of those different things. In terms of languages, this will obviously vary with the type of work you're doing and the type of company you're working for and the stack that they use. But there are definitely some common pairings between the front end and the back end. And what language you use on one side typically influences the language you use on the other side. For example, you often see JavaScript or TypeScript used on both sides. For example, React on the front end and Node.js on the back end. There are other common pairings such as using React on the front end with Java Spring Boot in the back end, or maybe Python on the back end, and a whole different mix of combinations. But there are definitely pairings that go together better for that ease of flow between the applications. And there are also lots of stacks going serverless, for example using AWS Lambda on the back end to handle that logic. The challenge with full stack, of course, is keeping up with both sides and the technical advances in both sides. So there's a lot to learn within just back end or within just front end. So mixing them both together does kind of double your workload in some sense. Not necessarily double your workload, but double the amount of things you have to learn. So you can only expect to get to a certain level if your focus is kind of split across both of them instead of just focused on one of them. So even full stack engineers, the majority of them typically tend to have a preference. They tend to be stronger at one side than the other, just naturally. And for me, I'm mainly a back-end engineer, but I am trying to be full stack because I definitely see the benefits of knowing both. And I think for anyone working in engineering, it's so useful to have at least a small overview of the whole stack and understand bits from the front end and from the back end. It makes things so much easier when you can kind of understand that whole big picture. But again, I have a preference for the back end, and some people may have a preference for the front end, but I think typically you will naturally gravitate more towards one side, but it is useful to have that full stack mindset at least. So if you do like understanding the big picture and love seeing that whole journey end to end, then full stack engineering might be for you. And then the last role that I want to talk about under this core software engineering roles title is mobile app developers. So these are the people that are typically building those apps that you use on your phones every day. Mobile development still involves the UI and still involves that back-end logic, but everything is more tailored specifically towards mobile devices. So you're thinking about the performance, you're thinking about the layout for mobile, and you're thinking about how users interact with things on their phone and thinking of designing it specifically for that use case. Thinking about the screen size, animations, thinking about touch screen and the different sizes, layouts, and all of that stuff. Some developers focus specifically on iOS, so building things using Swift and Xcode, and others focus on Android, so using Android Studio to write things with Kotlin or Java. And if you want to work cross-platforms, there are some cross-platform tools such as React Native or Flutter. So if you enjoy building things that people interact with every day or helping shape that real-world user experience, then mobile apps are probably for you. Next, there are some adjacent tech roles that are closely related to software engineering, but have quite a different focus, and they're not really able to come under the same category. So for example, jobs like your DevOps engineer, your cloud engineer, your data engineer, your machine learning engineer, your game developer, maybe an AI developer. There's probably more, but that's just kind of a list that I can think of. They might have some overlap with the software engineering roles, but they're very different in terms of the types of problems they solve and maybe how they think about those problems as well. And yes, there might be some, again, overlap in terms of they might still involve some code and there's a lot of problem solving involved, but they're kind of in their own separate category. I won't dive too deep into each one because they're not my area of expertise, but generally they're more focused on infrastructure, underlying systems, or maybe again experimentation. Each one will have its own different focus that again will differ from those core engineering roles. And some of these engineers across all categories often collaborate, and sometimes their roles may overlap a little. Sometimes the boundaries between each one does kind of get a little blurred. For example, as a backend engineer myself, I will have to either pick up some front-end work because I have actually chosen to, but if I didn't want to pick up any front-end work, I would at least need to communicate with those front-end engineers. I would need to understand how those things link together to deliver the whole feature or the whole piece of work. Same thing from a front-end perspective. From a DevOps engineer, again, they may need to collaborate with the back-end engineers to fix a certain thing where those roles overlap. So sometimes, whatever your role is, it's really useful to have at least a little understanding of those roles around you and understand the bigger picture and how things link together. It makes it so much easier for your own role, but also for that communication and that cross-collaboration. And it really helps deliver work a lot quicker when everyone is on the same page and everyone understands at least what the other person is doing. And you can kind of understand that people will have their specialty, but as long as you know at least roughly what they're working on, it can help improve the process so much more. And even though there are different types of engineers, there are definitely some common similarities across them all. So for example, all of them involve problem solving. So whatever route you want to go down, problem solving is a big thing and it needs to be something that you enjoy. You're always figuring out how things work, why they broke, how to fix them, how to make things better, and solving these problems. And number two, they all also involve collaboration. So the stereotype that engineers just sit alone at home in a dark room, not interacting with anyone, is false. And I think people know that by now. That is quite an outdated view, but there is a lot more collaboration involved in the roles than people often assume. So like I said, you need to kind of interact with different engineers within different roles, but also non-technical people, different stakeholders, different product owners, product managers, maybe business analysts, people that are more focused on design, agile leads, maybe scrum masters. There's a whole host of roles, technical and non-technical. So communication and collaboration is key. And number three, you will always be learning, no matter what role out of all of these that you're in. So technology advances fast, as we all know, and especially I think with the rise of AI, things are going to keep developing and it's going to keep changing the way we work. And that difference is only going to get greater and greater as time goes on. So there will always be new tools, new frameworks, new languages, new ways of working, new ways of thinking about problems. And yeah, it's really key that you keep learning and you kind of always have to stay curious and keep reading and yeah, just keep updated on everything new. So if you're just getting started and you're not sure which path to take, that's completely normal and you don't need to know right now. So I would say that first of all, just experiment and try a little bit of everything. You don't have to go too in depth at the start, just try a little bit of front end, try a little bit of back end, try do some, even if it's just some reading, do some reading into DevOps and understand how those underlying things work. Maybe have a read about cloud engineers. I'm kind of just giving you an overview of these different roles. And if you think one of them might suit you, go away and do that reading, or go away and try and code a little side project. Just get that understanding and just get that broad kind of surface level understanding of everything first. So then later down the line, that's when you can decide to specialize. And when you start with this reading and kind of just that basic understanding of things, make sure you start by focusing on the fundamentals first. So this is going to be key and the foundation for everything to build on top of. There's no point you trying to learn all the new frameworks and all this crazy cool stuff. You just want to start with the basic fundamentals. And then once you have those fundamentals, start building some real projects. Even if it's just a little small feature, once you get an idea of things and you start building them, that can give you a better idea of whether you enjoy it or not. And that momentum can help lead to building better things, and that's honestly the best way to learn, just by getting stuck in and doing practical things, not just the reading. And lastly, when you're just starting out, remember to keep things simple and stay consistent. So you don't want to rush ahead too much and try to build the most advanced thing straight away. So don't try and compare yourself to people who are much further along in their journey than you are. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed and hopefully you got something from it. Hopefully you have a better idea of what's involved within software engineering and the different paths that you can take. If you enjoyed, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what role you're currently in, or maybe what role you're leaning towards or aspiring to be. Hopefully see you next time.